Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. It seems as if the presidential campaign has been going on forever, but unfortunately, we're only at the beginning. You've probably been called more than once at dinner time and asked to express your views on the candidates, on the issues, and how you think President Obama is doing. And you may have received questionnaires. On the more local level, it's Micheline Blum's job to find out what we think about New York City officials, how they're doing their job, and the quality of the services we receive from the city. She's Distinguished Lecturer and Director of Survey Research at Baruch College's School of Public Affairs, and she's a veteran of many campaigns. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Mickey, there's been a lot of discussion lately about the New York City Police Department, its surveillance tactics, its stop and frisk policy. In fact, there was a front page article in the New York Times about how this policy seems to have divided the city. At a recent city council hearing, Commissioner Ray Kelly beat back criticisms of the department's stop and frisk policy, under which police stopped and questioned more than 684,000 people on the street last year. It's not clear how many of those stopped were actually searched, but the overwhelming number of them were Black and Latino. Commissioner Kelly said the stop and frisk policy is one of the reasons crime is down so dramatically in New York City. And according to your own recent poll on policing, a majority of New Yorkers agree. Correct?
A majority of New Yorkers agree, but there certainly is division on this, and there certainly are questions about the stop and frisk policy. New Yorkers feel very safe, and so
safer than they have in a long time.
Safer than they have in a long time. Almost 90% tell us that they feel safe in their neighborhood on the street during the day. About 3/4 say the same thing about how they feel at night. Even seniors feel safe on the streets. So naturally, people feel that the police department's doing a good job.
And must be doing something right.
They must be doing something right. And so in many instances, they kind of give them the benefit of the doubt on this. And they do sort of generally approve policies of the NYPD because, again, the NYPD is doing a good job. Crime is down. They're feeling safe. And when it came to stop and frisk, we did find that almost 60% of New Yorkers approved of the stop and frisk policies. On the other hand, there's a real division by race here, and
the majority of Black citizens do not approve.
Do not approve, whereas the majority of whites, the majority of Hispanics, the majority of Asians do approve. So we really see this racial split, and we see divisions by race, by age, and by gender on a number of issues.
Now, it's not surprising that the people it affects most, particularly Blacks, are the ones who are most opposed to it. It's interesting. Do you have any idea why Hispanics approve of it?
Well, we found, not just on this poll, but in others before, that Hispanics were, more approving in general, again, of the police and more fearful of often of crime, of terrorism, of a number of things, and therefore, again, a little bit more willing to go along with whatever policies were keeping people safe, and perhaps not feeling quite as targeted. I think that
as Blacks,
I think many more Black New Yorkers really feel that they are the target of stop and frisk in a way that I don't think many Latinos feel.
And, critics of the policy point out that the overwhelming number of those almost 700,000 who are stopped are not doing anything wrong. Only 12%, which is just a tiny percentage, are arrested or given summonses. So it comes off, it's easy to see how it comes off as all of the rest of them who were actually law-abiding feel that they are being harassed.
Right, and I think some of what we see actually when we look at the numbers about stop and frisk is we do see some division on some of these questions. We see almost even split on the issue of how good judgment the NYPD uses in applying the stop and frisk policies and making those decisions. New Yorkers are much more divided on that. And there's also some just very interesting numbers on profiling, because New Yorkers do think that the NYPD racially profiles. A majority of every group believes that the NYPD racially profiles. But then we asked, do you think that they do that in response to or in proportion to the crime, the race of the perpetrators in crime reports that they're receiving? And
they do feel
and again, yeah, now a majority saying yes, actually, we think it's in proportion to the crime reports they receive. So they're not quite sure. They're not of one mind on this. It's a difficult question, and you can sort of see as we go through the different questions that people kind of are wrestling with it a bit, and that it all depends on where you're coming from and who you are. So that if you are young, and if you are male, and if you are black, or if you are any one of those three, and certainly if you are all of those three, you are so much more likely to have been stopped and frisked than if you were older, or if you were white, or if you were female.
Right.
And the numbers are astonishingly different when we asked. Blacks were more than twice as likely to have been stopped as whites. Young, something like 4 or 5 times as likely to have been stopped as older people. Again, men 5 times as likely to be stopped as women. So, it does depend on who you are and how you see this question, as whether you see this protecting you or perhaps targeting you or harassing you.
You found your survey, a recent survey, that same survey, in fact, found that New Yorkers are divided over the issue of police surveillance of Muslims in order to prevent terrorist attacks. 43% approve of the focus on Muslims, 44% are opposed. Now, what I found interesting, and I wonder if you find it surprising, that New Yorkers are actually more tolerant of police profiling blacks and Latinos than they are of police profiling Muslims.
Yes, and I do think that that's interesting. I think that here, again, I'm not, I don't know that I can, pinpoint all the reasons why that might be, and whether or not they just don't see the relationship to the, of this surveillance of Muslims as making sense to them, but they're in the way that perhaps they see that they believe that stop and frisk has somehow protected them over the years. But we do still, even in that question, see a split by race. But what was interesting in that particular question was that there was also this. The very highly educated New Yorkers were the most opposed to the focus on Muslims, and regardless of race, and yet didn't seem to have that. It didn't show up in quite the same way
when it came to racial profiling.
Okay. So that's kind of an interesting thing. They somehow saw that this was, in a way, some sort of bias or a focus that on people that shouldn't, that was perhaps focusing on people who hadn't done anything except be Muslim, but didn't necessarily see the stop and frisk as just stopping people who had committed no crime other than being black and walking the street.
Interesting. Moving on to some other subjects. Have you done any polling on health-related mandates like smoking bans, restaurant grades, calorie and ingredient counts?
We actually have. We've done. We are doing something right now on secondhand smoke, so we'll see how that one comes out. And we've done some on smoking in the past. And what we've seen with smoking bans is that New Yorkers over the years, this keeps moving. People are more and more in favor of banning it in more and more places, and less tolerant of smoking pretty much anywhere.
I think it's getting to the point where you're not going to be allowed to smoke in your bathroom.
That's right. Well, you aren't, because in fact, one of the things that's happening now is the idea of having smoke-free buildings, and not allowing people to even smoke in their own apartments. So it really has, it's changed so dramatically in a decade, and it is just about exactly a decade, that we went from thinking that it was, kind of this dramatic thing to have a ban on smoking in restaurants. Oh my God, all the restaurants will close.
Go out of
and
business.
They'll go out of business, and how,
And it's an incursion on people's freedom.
And people thought this, this was going to be, the end of all sorts of restaurants, and then it obviously it has moved from that to a ban on smoking in so many places,
in the park,
and in the parks now. Yeah, so even outside.
Right.
Now, and
on CUNY campuses.
On CUNY campuses, it really has changed, and people's attitudes have really changed. And as attitudes change, then officials see that they can move it a little bit further. They can try the next thing. They see, well, what if? Would you be in favor of? And in fact, have been sort of following, opinion to some extent on that.
Now, New Yorkers like the restaurant grades, right?
Absolutely. They love the restaurant grades. We were getting 91% of New Yorkers approve of the restaurant grades. They see it, I think, as some sort of sign that of good government, of the government sort of protecting them in some way, because you never know. You're going into a restaurant, and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and somehow that A in the window is telling you it's okay, it's safe to eat here, and they like that.
And there has been the city health officials say that there has been, since the restaurant grades went into effect, there has been a drop in the number of, I guess, food poisoning cases.
Yes, and foodborne illnesses and all sorts of problems like that. And I think, I think New Yorkers like it now. Obviously people who own restaurants are not as happy with it, and there are maybe problems with it, and there, I'm sure, are things that probably could, should, will be changed about it. But I think when you ask the general public, they know about it now. They look for it. They actually look for it now, and they find it reassuring, and pay attention to it, and they want it to continue. In fact, if anything, they would like to see more inspections. They'd like to see them to be more frequent rather than cut back. So
we're going to take a short break. Then we'll be back with more with Micheline Blum, Director of Baruch Survey Research at the Baruch School of Public Affairs.
Hi, how are you doing today?
What looks good?
Our special today is shrimp scampi. It's been sitting around for about a week.
Excuse me, what time are you guys leaving? We're gonna rob your house tonight.
Don't you wish there were warnings to protect you from life's risks? With diabetes, there is one. It's called A1C, a simple blood test that helps measure your risk of serious complications. Learn more at diabetesa1c.org.
Welcome back to One to One. We're talking with Micheline Blum, Director of Survey Research at the Baruch College School of Public Affairs. Mickey, tell me about your new New York City SAT score.
Oh, thank
you. Is New
for
York City
asking.
going to be able to get into an Ivy League
Right,
school?
right. Well, they get into right. Well, we thought we were sort of somewhat amused in coming up with our SAT score, our SAT score, because on some level it's also about satisfaction, and it is a score for the city on how well the city is doing in a number of ways. So we ask about approval of the mayor, and we ask about satisfaction with city services, and we ask about sort of the trend of the city. The SAT comes from satisfaction, approval, and trend.
Right.
So we're asking about the direction of the city, and we've done it twice now. We did it once last May, and we've now done it again on this latest poll to see if how things may have changed.
And the city's overall SAT score was 51%.
Yeah, no,
it was 51.
And that's last. Yeah,
Oh,
right. No, it's gone up.
Oh, well, that's good. What is it now?
And now it's over 60. So
oh my
now
goodness.
Yeah. So what has happened is that it was barely positive last spring.
Okay.
And now it's it went up. So we see that in fact on every one of those questions there was an improvement. The city it has very high marks in satisfaction with city services. 3/4, I think, of people were satisfied with city services. And when it came to Mayor Bloomberg, his numbers improved greatly from last spring.
What's his approval rating?
54%. So which is pretty good. I mean, it's not where it was a few years ago when he was getting in the 60s.
Right.
But,
but isn't that typical for a third-term mayor?
I was going to say a third term. You know what? If you're still getting majority approval in a third
That's
term,
terrific.
it's pretty good.
Because it seems that right about towards the end of the second term, and certainly if you get a third term, New Yorkers start getting really tired of their mayors.
They absolutely do. And to begin with, people were not all that thrilled with the whole idea that he was running for a third term. And a third term is always harder. You almost wonder why any politician decides to go for a third term. It's hard to think of anyone who had a great third term.
Because I remember Mayor Koch was really popular the first 2 terms, and then the third term he just took a real dive.
And it really, there's lots of evidence that this happens, not just here, but all around the country with mayors and governors who sort of, I don't know, overstay their welcome, shall we say. And so a third term is really hard. The fact that he's getting majority approval in the third term is a really good thing. I mean, there are, if you break it down and we start to ask about specific things, he may not be doing as well on some as on others. But in general, New Yorkers are still generally approving of their mayor. And New Yorkers believe, and part of this is that New Yorkers believe that the city is moving in the right direction, which is one of those questions we ask nationally and when we ask locally, and it's often a very good measure of how elections are going to turn out, or what the sort of general mood of a city is. Do you think that the city's moving in the right direction, on the wrong track? And a majority of New Yorkers think this city is moving in the right direction, and I think give the mayor some credit for the city not maybe doing as badly as some other places in the country in the last few years.
In your SAT poll, young New Yorkers emerge as some of the happiest, I guess, both with city services and with the direction the city is moving in. They're happy. The wealthy, well, surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
Manhattanites happier than people, certainly in the Bronx. The least happy, blacks, Hispanics, women, and Bronx residents.
Well, and here again, we're going to deal with it, depends on how it's going for you. And if you're doing well, and if the city seems, that is delivering services you want, and you feel that, you feel pretty good about it, that's, you're approving the mayor, you're approving the direction of the city. The people who've had the hardest time, economically, all over the country and certainly in the city over the last few years, are disproportionately minorities. And so that's not maybe terribly surprising that they're not as happy. I think men were always a bit more approving of the mayor than women, perhaps because of his sort of business background and their kind of their view of him. The wealthy are doing better everywhere. And they're doing better here.
The wealthy are always
pretty
happy.
And they're pretty happy, and Manhattanites are pretty happy. Manhattan's doing pretty well. I mean, I think those are also those have always been, groups that were strong for the mayor. I think he's really always done well among them.
Concerns about immigration have been a big issue in many parts of the country in recent years. A lot of anti-immigrant feeling, a number of anti-immigrant laws passed or that states have tried to pass. Are we experiencing any of that in New York City?
So much less than anywhere else. This is a city of immigrants, and we know that. We know that half of the city is either immigrant themselves or children of immigrants. So this is a city of immigrants, always has been, and our attitudes towards immigrants are very different here than they are in the rest of the country. People do not want to have laws like the ones we've seen in Arizona and elsewhere. They do not want to see our NYPD enforcing immigration laws. They don't, and when we ask questions like, because we did do a poll on immigration, we asked questions about whether you think that undocumented immigrants are taking jobs that Americans would want or take, or are they taking the jobs that Americans don't want? And New Yorkers overwhelmingly say no, they're taking the jobs Americans don't want. They're not taking away jobs from Americans. So New Yorkers really see it in a very different light. Also, we asked, do you think that immigrants make the city better or worse? And we actually even asked it about recent immigrants, not just immigrants from 100 years ago, but recent immigrants are they making the city better? And New Yorkers think they are.
New York seems to be a very tolerant, liberal place compared to what's going on in other parts of the country. I mean, we support same-sex marriage, raising the minimum wage to $10 from $7.15, I think it is now. Abortion rights, contraception, we're friendly to immigrants. Are we living in a bubble here in New York?
Well, we are certainly living in a city that is far more tolerant and far more liberal or progressive than is true in a lot of the country. But I think the country is not necessarily where some of these more extreme laws and some of what we've been hearing in the Republican campaign is either. I think that that's frankly to the right even of the rest of the country. I think on issues like contraception, when you look at the polling on this, it's very one-sided. People, not only 99% of Americans use contraception. People believe it is their right to have contraception. People think that it's insurance and employers should cover it, that they should be required to.
And yet, if you look at the Republican presidential candidates, they have made reproductive issues, abortion, mandatory sonograms, whether employers should, their insurance coverage should cover contraception, Planned Parenthood, whether it should be run out of the country. They have made this a central theme of their campaign, with all of the candidates seemingly trying to outdo each other in sort of turning the clock back for women. Why? I mean, it doesn't seem to be working for them.
I think it is a mistake, frankly, on a political level. I mean, regardless of what one's personal views are on the topic, I think it's a political error because women vote. Lots of women vote, and women do not like this. There was a gender gap in 2008, and there appears to be a much larger gender gap now. The Republicans are not going to do well with women if they promote these kinds of laws that restrict women, that impose, the sonograms on them, or where they're trying to get women to have to tell their employer why they want contraception, what they're using it for. I mean, that's what most women would consider a terrible invasion.
Right. We got about a minute left. I know the subject you poll people about is largely dictated by who hires you to do polls, but are there any subjects that you just personally would love to take on?
Well, actually, the fact that we just took on the whole issue of the NYPD was one that we came up with because we felt this was something very much in the news, and we cared deeply about it. We are the School of Public Affairs. We feel it is our duty to take on, you know, some of these very important issues to New Yorkers.
And as we get closer to the election in the fall, I think you're probably going to get busier and busier. So
I hope so.
We're out of time, even if we're not out of polls. I want to thank Micheline Blum, Director of Survey Research at the Baruch College School of Public Affairs, for joining me today. For more information about Baruch College Survey Research, go to baruch.cuny.edu. For the City University of New York and 1 to 1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.